say is that entiendo bastante el español, pero no hablo mucho. Y disculpa por eso. I would love to say everything in Spanish, but you will not like what you hear if I do. So please tell me if you need me to slow down, or if you didn't understand something and someone else can help maybe to repeat it. But I'm happy if you remind me just to slow down a little bit, because I get very excited about this and about teaching, so please just let me know if you need anything like that. I'm excited to be here, and I'm thankful for the opportunity to be here. I was really excited to take some time to think about what critical thinking means to me and how I teach critical thinking, and it got me thinking a lot about what some of the challenges are to critical thinking. I hadn't really thought about that before getting ready for today, and so I want to spend some time in the second half really thinking about what gets in the way of this thing that we call critical thinking. I think a lot of things are sort of in the way for us. So, they asked me to come up with some objectives, and I have 3. One is to help you develop an understanding of what it means to think critically. The second is to recognize the power of critical thinking for effective leadership and for engagement and social change. And then the third is to practice strategies for effective critical thinking. So we'll do all of those things and a little bit more this evening.
Do you want the lights off or on?
I think it's fine for now. We'll
Okay.
have a video in a little while.
That's a really...
Also, this may feel hopefully this feels very natural, but anytime I give a workshop or a presentation or teach, I talk about, for a second at least, about the environment that we have here together. So I'm hopeful that we can together create a space in which all are encouraged to speak and share, all are respected and treated with dignity and civility. Critical thinking, one of the most important pieces of it, is combating the lack of civility. Right? If we think critically, we are learning how to help each other tell more complex stories, and telling more complex stories helps us to understand each other and to be more civil. So we start, obviously, in this room, and I want you to know that starting off, I respect very much you and your presence here, and we'll keep respecting that. So I thought we might start. I had no idea how many we would be, although I thought we would start with an icebreaker to get to know each other in the room and for me to get to know something about you. If you wouldn't mind, turning to the person next to you, please introduce yourself and share, if you will, something that you care deeply about. It could be anything. It could be a person. It could be something an activity that you do. Anything. Hopefully that was enough time to get to know a little bit about each other, just a little tiny something, but something that you care about. And I would love it if you would share something of that with me. So if you wouldn't mind going around and saying your name and saying something that you learned from the person next to you. And Olivia, will you start?
He loves writing, and he's going to write it. She's already writing, in the middle of writing a screenplay.
Ooh.
A creative writer.
And you are Ana Olivia?
Yes, me?
Yes, this is Ana Olivia, and she...
Edward.
Yes.
Edward Gutierrez.
I'm Edward, you're Ana Olivia.
We got that done.
You got that? We figured that out, okay. And Ana Olivia is an executive director. She's a power, a mover and shaker here in Salem, who loves to do mom stuff and go shopping and clean the house and make sure everyone has their lunch. And so I did not know that about her, so I appreciate it.
I love being a homemaker.
A homemaker,
mom,
a
yeah.
home and a wife and mom.
Thank you, you too. How about you?
My name is Adriana, and I met Hector, and I shared that we care deeply about our family.
Nice to already have something in common. Yes. Excellent. Thank you.
And I'm Hector. Yeah, she's a talk about it.
Thanks. How about you too?
This is Eduardo, and from what we shared, he cares very deeply about youth and making sure that they have equal opportunities and that they have education, and having a quality education, and having them be on the same level of opportunity as everyone, especially for underprivileged.
And this is Eduardo, and he was talking about he cares very much about issues of injustice, and it doesn't matter if it's a matter of gender, it's a matter of sexual preference or color. is very thick about the issue of the white black or color shades. And we all should get the same kind of education or opportunity for a job or being able to be successful regardless.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. All right. I'll tell you a little bit about me so you know where I'm coming from with this. I have been a college professor since 2009, and I was trained as a critical human geographer. And a lot of people would just say geographer, and many people would understand geologist, and I don't study rocks, which is a big distinction that we make. Many people, I will say, I am a geographer, and they say, oh, so you know a lot about rocks. I'm not a geologist, I'm a geographer. So we have to do
maps.
We have to do a lot of translation of what we do as geographers. It's a little bit less known. You probably know geography from grade school, studying maps, how to use maps, trying to understand about the natural environment. What I like to study the most is how humans interact with the environment. So you can think about how we exist in cities, why we build cities the way we do, the connections between the rural or divides between rural and urban, and how life is led, how we get food from one place to another, what that means for the environment. Right? So those kinds of things. And the critical part means that I'm thinking about issues like social justice. I'm thinking about what problems might be caused by the way we use the environment. So I'm not looking at it objectively. I don't want to just think, well, the river runs this way, and here's how we use it. I want to think, what does it mean that we use the river in this way? And who's going to be dealing with the consequences downstream of using the river in this way? Right? So that's the critical piece. It means I care about what I'm learning about the world in order to change it for the better. So that gives you a little bit of a hint to what we mean by critical thinking. I'm also a visual artist. I make comics and graphic novels and illustration. So that's the kind of other fun side of what I do. Something I care deeply about is equity and inclusion in education. I'm from a low income background, and it took a lot to get myself through college and then through the rest of graduate school all the way to a PhD. And I saw a lot of people not be able to do that along the way. And so that matters deeply to me. I also I'm going to talk a little bit about leadership, and the main source of leadership other than in college has been working on the board of directors for an organization called Sisters of the Road Cafe, and we work on houselessness. And that organization has existed since 1979, and they've been doing a lot of work for a long time. So I care deeply about that too. I thought it was only fair to share something that I care deeply about as well with you. I thought I should tell you a few things over the course, since 2009 I've been teaching, and over that time, almost 10 years, I've learned a lot about critical thinking. And I thought when I first got into the classroom that the most important things were to teach about my subject matter, teach about geography. And slowly over time, I came to realize that what was actually needed was me to teach about critical thinking. So it was actually the most important thing, is to help students understand how to question, and that it's okay to question, and that it's okay to not trust something right away, to see some information and to say, I don't know if I believe this. What does it mean? Where does this come from? So I really immediately started thinking, actually what I'm doing here in the college classroom is teaching critical thinking. So I'm trying today to bring some of that to you as well. So one of the things that I've learned is that when we are children, we ask a lot of questions, right? We're like, why? Why is that the way it is? I want to understand more. And we ask lots of questions. And we sort of get trained to stop asking questions, right? So to let that all go and just accept. Don't be trouble. Just accept what you're hearing and it's fine. You can ask questions later, right? We don't ask hard questions because we don't want someone to feel bad, right? So sometimes we're sort of like, I don't really think that that's true, but I'm not going to say anything because I don't want to hurt their feelings, right? So we start to train ourselves even to say like, I'm going to let this go, or it's probably fine, right? Or that person said it, so it's probably true. I don't need to look it up to find out, right? So we sort of get trained to stop asking questions, and I want us to be different, right? I want us to start to ask questions and to feel comfortable and confident asking questions. I teach a course about South Asia, and the students who come into my class, as you might imagine, because Americans are famous for this, they know almost nothing about South Asia. They come into the class and they say, oh yeah, India, my parents went there once, this is how it is, right? And so you start to make these really broad, really sort of uncritical portraits that you paint of a place that you've never been. And so I have to teach students from the very beginning to recognize their own very simple ideas about places and about other people, right? So I'm saying immediately from the start, okay, let's work through what you already think you know about this place. Let's slow down and let me teach you some more. And you'll start to feel overwhelmed because South Asia is a complex, huge area of the world with a lot of different people and a lot of different languages and a lot of different geography. And so we have to start from somewhere, but recognize we will never understand all of it, right? It will never be all something that you can comprehend. So you have to start somewhere, but you have to recognize and be comfortable not knowing, right? And be comfortable not understanding everything. Because when you say you understand everything, you are closed down to learning, right? You're closed down to understanding something better. So I try to teach students to be curious. I try to teach them to look for more information always. I've learned in leadership and in activism around critical thinking, the importance of listening, like really being quiet and listening, of asking questions, of witnessing what's happening around me, right? That if I walk into a situation like in this organization that I work and I say, oh, okay, so I know what we're doing, this is the plan for today. I'm clearly not listening, right? I'm just beginning from my own understanding and not taking in the stories of other people. So that feels really important to me, that I slow down, I listen, I push myself to see people and places from different perspectives. I try to imagine what it might be like to have gone through something that someone else has gone through and not just through my own eyes.
Put yourself in the shoes of others.
I put my shoes, I try to teach students to, and I certainly do practice putting myself in the shoes of other people. Being at Sisters of the Road, this organization in Portland, I realized very quickly how little I knew. And I'm somebody with a PhD, you know, and I'm supposed to be walking around and saying, I understand a lot because I went to school for a long time. But I don't understand so much of what I learn every day in a place that serves homeless people. I have so much to learn. So what I need to do is to be quiet, but then to ask questions, right? To be really present. So those are a few of the things that I've learned through leadership and activism and through teaching. Has anybody ever listened to this podcast called Reveal? It's a really interesting, it comes from the Center for Investigative Reporting. And
Is it
outlets
ever
and-
on OPD or NPR? Ever?
Yes,
Is
I
it?
don't know if it gets played on OPD, but
But
certainly
NPR.
it's online on NPR. Yeah, it's an NPR affiliated show called
We
Reveal.
can maybe send a link to folks. We have
happy
folks
to.
email.
Probably have.
Yeah.
And the host of the show, every single show he does, at the end he says, remember, there's always more to the story. And he's just finished giving you a piece of investigative journalism for an hour. And at the very end of all of that work that he's done, that's how he ends, is to say, remember, there's always more to the story. And I feel like that's, for me, that's really powerful, right? That even after you've done your homework, even after you've thought about it and you've talked to different people, and you've done all of this work, you still don't know everything there is to know. And that's right. That's how it should be, right? You can't know everything. So I really appreciate it. It's kind of a, what's the word? It's like he doesn't need to be like on his high horse. I can't think of the word right now, but you know, that sense of like humility,
Exactly.
right? Humility. Even though I've done all of this, I still know that I just can't know everything.
In fact, that's another word, cultural humility. I was just talking about.
Right.
You need to remember that.
Yeah, I think that's really, it's essential to being to being able to make change in the world is having humility. And having humility, you listen, right? You participate, you engage. So, what is critical thinking? I promised you I would start off with saying, what is this thing that we're calling critical thinking? And this, as I was preparing, I was wondering, is the definition of critical thinking I have the same as Edward's? Is it the same as, you know, the next person? And all I could do is say, okay, this is what it is to me, and I hope it resonates. So one way to think about critical thinking is that it's a way of looking at, thinking about, encountering the world, right? It means beginning with an expectation that things will be complex, right? And that there will be many ways to understand an issue, always. And what does it mean it means to be ready for that, to expect it. So when you hear about an issue, you immediately know somebody else is gonna think differently about that. You know, so someone says, the only way to think about this is like this. And you kind of go immediately, this is not true, right? There's so many possibilities. And it's important, I think, to be a critical thinker, you have to know life is complex. Whatever people are telling me, it's probably more complex than that. And I don't necessarily need to argue with them, I just need to know that for me. So that when I ask questions, I will say, there's probably more to that. I'm gonna find out later. I'm gonna choose to not maybe combat someone right now, but I'm gonna remember this and I'm gonna do my homework, right? Because it's possible that there's a lot more to this. So if someone says, this is the best way to do this is the only way to do this, a really good critical thinker immediately thinks, it's time to ask some questions, right? That can't possibly be all there is to it.
No, I don't expect you to stand up the whole time if you're
Well,
tired.
thank you. Well, no, it's kind of like a dance for me.
Yeah, keep talking.
There's a lot of text here, and it's just to kind of reinforce what I'm saying. And part of this list is really long because critical thinking means a lot of different things. It's a complex sort of set of activities, ways of thinking, right, that we'll go through. But some of them are, critical thinking means looking for background, looking for history about an issue. It means being curious, right, so that you want to know more, so that you're driven to know more. When someone says vote for 105 in this way, you say, okay, why should I do that? Right? And you ask the question to hear what that person's perspective is. And then you go and ask somebody else, and you listen to their perspective. And then you try to see some reporting on it. And then you ask someone about another related policy that came up a few years ago. What was that like? Right? Where's this coming from? So listening to what's being said while also recognizing who it's coming from, asking why they might be paying for that, right? What is the goal of it? And then how is that supposed to impact us? What do I think about that? So asking those questions. It means not accepting things at face value, right? Someone tells you how it is and you say, I don't think that's quite how it has to be, right? It means, I think, rethinking social norms. So there's so many things that are normal, right, in our society. So many things that we just take for granted. Understand them as status quo. That's just how it is. You can think about laws. You can think about how we think about certain medicines, right? A great example is something like cigarettes that we used to think was healthy for us, right? There was a time in this country where we thought cigarettes were a good thing and that we should all be smoking them. Obviously that's changed. Now we don't believe that anymore. We still smoke them, but we don't talk about how they're healthy for us, right? Quite the opposite. We talk about how they're not healthy for us. So the reason why we came to understand that is because somebody was thinking critically. Someone said, while it seems to be normal to say that cigarettes are healthy, something's not right with that, right? And so that's scientists, that's policymakers eventually, that's people who are getting sick and saying, hey, this is not good for me. But it means somebody asked questions, hard questions. And those were not popular questions. Because if we think about the case of cigarettes, who benefits from a lot of people thinking that cigarettes are healthy? Tobacco companies, right? People with power and people with money. They don't want you thinking about that, right? They don't want you critically thinking about what they are producing for you. They want you to buy it and think it's good for you. So there's a challenge there, right? So what I'm suggesting is that we need to think about social norms, right? How we talk to each other, what we buy, what we believe, and ask hard questions about those, right? And some of the things that means too is things like assumptions and stereotypes, right? All of us are impacted by stereotypes in our lives that somebody makes about us, right? In lots of different ways. Maybe those have changed throughout your life too, right? Someone looks at you and says, oh, I know that, I know who you are. And that's a social norm that we can change if we think critically, right? We can talk about how it's important to understand how people are complex. And you don't actually know their story until you ask them, right? And so those are kinds of things that critical thinking does too. We want to, as critical thinkers, avoid the temptation to simplify, right? We, just as Eduardo said, we are in a moment of simplification. right? Where we want these, and politicians especially, want simple, cohesive, little snippets that they can say that people will get behind, right? And what that does is it sort of puts a blanket over all of the complexity and presents something as simple. And we all can imagine what happens when we simplify, right? The richness of our stories get taken away. Maybe we lose some of our rights because we're understood as, part of the whole. There are all kinds of things that can come from that sort of, let's call it whitewashing of a situation or of a person or of a group or a population. And so critical thinking allows us to say, there's something wrong with that stereotype. It's incomplete. That doesn't define who we are. And in fact, we need to talk about that. Right? One of the most important things, I think, and we'll talk about this more in terms of strategies for critical thinking, is asking hard questions. Why are things this way? Have they always been this way? Who loses because of this? Who wins because of this? And the cigarette company example is a good one, right, in that case. Who benefits? It's pretty clear who benefits. Who loses? That also is clear, right? The people who are around us when we're smoking and ourselves when we smoke. Could it be different? Can we imagine a life, a situation, a politic in which things are not this way? And that is, I think, the power of critical thinking, is that we can look at something and say, just because that's how it is now, doesn't mean that's how it has to be. It doesn't mean it's how it was, and it doesn't mean it's how it will be, right? We can change that through things like critical thinking. So critical thinking is about working to understand what's underneath what someone says, right? Someone says, that's fake news. Why is it fake news? How is it fake news? Are you looking at where it's coming from and what's meant by it? That term, I think we need to be really careful about as well. It becomes really easy, and I'm starting to hear people on all sides of political situations saying, oh, that's just fake news. And this is a dangerous, slippery slope, right?
Horrible.
Critical thinkers are not quick to label that. We want to understand, right? What does it mean? If there is some kind of a false argument going around, where is it coming from? Who is circulating it? What does it mean? What are they trying to do? We can learn a lot from that, right? So I'm not suggesting we believe it, but I'm suggesting we investigate it and we don't dismiss, because there are all kinds of ideas floating around that could be helpful for us to understand. And I'm especially hearing students lately saying, oh, that's just fake news. And I'm saying, well, don't be so quick, right? If you're that quick, then maybe you don't trust anything. And we need to be able to discern between what is true and what is not true, what is motivated in some way that maybe is nefarious or not good, right? And what is motivated for the good. So that we need to be able to discern and not just say, that's not right. I'm not gonna look any further. We clearly, in this era of trying to understand what civility means again, and I think that's my read on where we are as a society, is that we've lost that desire for civility, and we've lost the ability to bring together people who have different kinds of beliefs. And critical thinking it might at first seem like a kind of a judgment, right? If you tell me something and I say, well, I'm not sure if that's completely true, it might seem like I'm judging what you've said. What I'm instead trying to do is to understand it better. So what I can do when someone tells me something that I'm not sure I believe is ask questions. I love that idea, is so interesting to me. What does it mean to you? Where does that come from? What's the background of that? Right? How long have you thought that? Have you changed your mind at any point? Right? You can ask questions to draw out what someone is saying. And I think that's a challenge with critical thinking, is someone might feel like you don't believe them if you try to ask more questions. And so we have to find a way of practice asking questions in a way that doesn't shut people down.
Yes.
There's a lot of power at stake, right, in what we believe, especially with things like policies. Right? We are expected to trust that the policies that we have for our cities, in our states, are there for a reason, to keep us safe. And they're not, we've changed policy a lot over time, right? We have amendments to the Constitution. We haven't always gotten it right. We're constantly changing, in fact, right? So we're changing because we get it wrong. Things change. So we need to be able to say, while that may be true, that this is what the policy is, or this is what the Constitution says, or this is what our state legislature has said, there's a hole in it. And someone is losing. And if I don't say something, then they're going to continue to lose. Because this policy doesn't encompass everyone, or does too much, let's say. Right? So we're constantly having to say, hey, we need to speak truth to power. Just because that's a policy doesn't mean it always has, doesn't mean it always should be. Right? So we have to think about what is wrong with it. How might it be changed? How did it come about? And I really, as a teacher, like this idea that you say, oh, there's something wrong with that policy. Go find out where it came from. Go find out who tried to pass it in the first place. You know, if there's a policy about sanctuary cities, for example, where did that come from? How long have we had it? What would it mean to change it? Who benefits from it? Who loses from it?
Why did we have it?
Why do we have it, right? What motivated it in the first place? What should motivate it now, or should it motivate it now? Those are all questions we should be asking. All right, taking that forward, I want to show you a short video from a Nigerian author whose work I love. She wrote a book called Americana with an H at the end. I highly recommend it. She is also has become a public figure who's given a few TED Talks, which again I recommend checking out. This one has made a big impact on me. It's called The Danger of a Single Story. And in it, one quote from it is, she says that if you show people as one thing again and again and again, that's what they become. And I know that all of you have seen this in some way in your lives, right? If you show a houseless person as somebody who made bad decisions again and again and again, that's what people begin to believe, right? And they stop looking at this person who is homeless and saying, what happened for you? What do you need, right? What tragedies may have happened in your life? What injustices may be happening to you every day, right? We lose that because we think, oh, that person made bad decisions at one point, right? So her point here is, if society, if the news media, if our culture keeps showing us how someone is again and again and again, that's something that we just turn into fact, which of course it isn't and it shouldn't be, right? So I'm just going to show you 3 minutes from this video for us to think about what she means by the danger of a single story.
I would like to tell you a few personal stories about what I like to call the danger of the single story. I thought about this when I left Nigeria to go to university in the United States. I was 19. My American roommate was shocked by me. She asked where I had learned to speak English so well and was confused when I said that Nigeria happened to have English as its official language. She asked if she could listen to what she called my tribal music and was consequently very disappointed when I produced my tape of Mariah Carey. So after I had spent some years in the US as an African, I began to understand my roommate's response to me. If I had not grown up in Nigeria, and if all I knew about Africa were from popular images, I too would think that Africa was a place of beautiful landscapes, beautiful animals, and incomprehensible people fighting senseless wars, dying of poverty and AIDS, unable to speak for themselves, and waiting to be saved by a kind white foreigner. So that is how to create a single story. Show a people as one thing, as only one thing, over and over again, and that is what they become. I recently spoke at a university where a student told me that it was such a shame that Nigerian men were physical abusers like the father character in my novel. I told him that I had just read a novel called American Psycho, and that it was such a shame that young Americans were serial murderers. It would never have occurred to me to think that just because I had read a novel in which a character was a serial killer, that he was somehow representative of all Americans. And now this is not because I'm a better person than that student, but because of America's cultural and economic power. I had many stories of America. I had read Thailand, Updike, and Steinbeck, and Gateskill. I did not have a single story of America. I've always felt that it is impossible to engage properly with a place or a person without engaging with all of the stories of that place and that person. The consequence of the single story is this: it robs people of dignity. It makes our recognition of our equal humanity difficult. It emphasizes how we are different rather than how we are similar. Stories matter. Many stories matter. Stories have been used to dispossess and to malign, but stories can also be used to empower and to humanize. Stories can break the dignity of a people, but stories can also repair that broken dignity.
I find that every time I watch even just a clip of that, I find it so powerful, and her words are, for me, just exactly what I mean to say.
That's what I was raised, that's how I was raised, when I told you about like the Eskimo.
Yeah, exactly.
I was raised with a single story.
That's right. We have all kinds of them. And I think one of the things that I love about how she talks is that she talks about her own single stories that she has had about other people, right? She's not saying, you all over there do this. She's saying, I do it. We all do it. We're taught to do this, right? We're taught to say, this is how people are there. This is what it means to be from this place. These are how these people act, right? We're taught to do that. We're trained to do that. And she's saying, hey, we don't have to do it. We can do a lot of other, we can be better. We can ask for more stories. So we've talked about what critical thinking is, and we've given some examples of why it's important. And a question that I keep coming back to is why do we do it all the time? Why isn't it something that everyone's doing all the time? We know that it's powerful, right? We know that we want to make change for the better. We want to be our best selves. We want to do right in this world, right? And we know that critical thinking helps us get there because it helps us work to understand issues. It helps us work to understand other people and other places, right? So what stands in the way of critical thinking? We talked a little bit about this when we said, who would not want us to think critically, right? That there are individuals, there are organizations, there are institutions that would not prefer that we think critically. And some of those are anyone whose power might be threatened by us knowing more. I know you can all think of examples, right? Anyone who's out there saying, if you know more, I lose my power. That could be marketers, right? That could be people selling you products. That could be people making laws. That could be people who are any number of things, right? Who are renting you an apartment, who have some kind of power that is threatened by you knowing more, right? Knowing what your rights are at work, those kinds of things. So anyone whose power is threatened by asking tough questions, that's somebody who might not want you to think critically. Anyone who stands to gain from people not knowing their rights, right? There are a lot of people who stand to gain. If we don't know what we can have, what is due to us, then someone can abuse that as well, right? Anyone who would like to exploit us, right? Anyone who would like to make money off of us, right? Selling us something that makes us sick. Selling us something that they make on the cheap. I think a lot about GMOs, genetically modified organisms, right? That there's a huge battle to not label these products that come from these ingredients, right? That there are companies, there are big time farmers who say, we don't want anyone to label these things because by labeling them, it makes people think they're bad. But you might also think by labeling them, people have a choice. You can say, oh, this has that in it, I don't want that. Or it does, and I don't mind, right? But by saying you can't label that, you're saying you can't have information, right? So that's something I think a lot about. I studied biotechnology and GMOs, and I was thinking a lot about choice, right? And the ability to have the power to label something so that you know what it is and you can make a choice. So that's somebody, perhaps, who would not want you to have information. It's an example of someone who wouldn't want you to have to actually ask questions and think critically. I also think about structural violence, structural racism, structural sexism, right? That has power because we don't ask questions, because we say, oh, well, that's just how it works, because we allow things to happen, right? So somebody might say, that doesn't need to change, it's always been that way, right? But if we actually said, if we labeled things differently, if we spoke with different words, we could actually combat structural racism. It is in the power of the mundane, of the everyday, of the fact that we use the same words all the time that actually have these deeper kind of not great meanings, right? We don't say what we mean. We use these euphemisms and other ways of talking around things. All of these get in the way of us making change and understanding how we could do something, how we could talk differently for a better future, right? So structural racism, I think, is held up by us not thinking critically. Right? So that's obviously a really good argument for why we need to be doing it, at least I think. Certainly, as representatives of community or a group, it's critically important to be informed, right? And that's something that in order to have power in our communities, we have to know what's going on. You need to know who, and you can think about if you were going to be a politician, if you're going to go into politics, you need to not only understand an issue, but how it's impacting different people, where it came from, right? And so what stands in the way sometimes of critical thinking is not having enough time. Not everyone wants to hear you asking tough questions, right? There are those with power who would prefer that you didn't ask tough questions. Are there any other reasons you can think of, like things that get in the way of you thinking critically, or people you know thinking critically? We talked too about, potentially being unsafe and afraid of change. Yeah, gotcha.
I think when we were discussing critical thinking and curiosity, I remember not that long ago, I was in a group with people, and my little one was in the room. She's 2. And so she's just a full bundle of energy and joy, and talks and talks and talks and talks. And I have also 2 teenagers who are constantly questioning everything. And somebody was like, sometimes they just need to learn to not ask questions. And so I challenged that, and I was like, well, why do you think that way though? And they're like, that's why we see a lot of challenges with people constantly questioning police officers and constantly questioning, even if they are not in the right? Even if they did commit an offense, and because this was a friend police officer of mine, he's like, and they just need to learn to obey, and whatever you say is. And I was like, okay, that's really interesting way of thinking. And so I kept asking, I kept challenging them and questioning them, and I was like, for me, I want my kids to be critical thinkers. I want them to know. I want them to ask questions. I was like, and when my kids sit there and question everything that I'm doing, sometimes it makes me stop and wonder, well, why are they asking? That is true. But it's kind of going back to the point at the beginning when you said we're taught to not think critically. We're taught to stay quiet and obey and follow the way things are without challenging them. And so it's challenging when you're around people that think that way, because when you do question, then it comes across, especially if it's coming from, for me, it comes across as aggressive, or it comes across as, why do you keep asking? Why?
Yeah, this gets to the point that when you are a critical thinker, you have to also be like an advocate for critical thinking. Right? That you don't get to just do it. You have to also help people understand why it's important, right? And that you have to sort of help teach in the moment that you're also trying to learn, which is a lot, right? It's a lot to hear, give and take at the same time. But there is so much stacked against us as critical thinkers, in that it is hard for people. It's challenging. You feel questioned if someone comes back. I also can feel defensive if someone questions something that I've said, right? And we all feel defensiveness. So how do we channel that and kind of to empathize, right? To understand, okay, this person is a police officer. This is going to be a tricky conversation. If they're saying people need to learn how to obey, and I'm saying I want my kids to learn how to not obey in the right way, how do we get to the same place? And for me, as an academic, I go back to history, like the power of understanding how things have changed over time, right? That the police in the past, even if we don't speak about this moment, there have been times in which our best interests were not being held for, right? We know that that is true, even if we completely don't think about this moment, which can be challenging to do, and especially speaking to a current police officer. But if we look back in time, if we look at the South during the Civil Rights Movement, if we look at the farm workers movement, right? We look at all kinds of different moments in time. We saw officers of the peace not acting in our best interests, not upholding our rights. And so we have to remember, and I think help people who are officers of the law today to understand that that history exists and that present exists. And so we have to talk about it, and try to help people understand how history teaches us something really important. Even if it's unsafe to talk about this moment. it isn't always safe to question someone in that moment. And I think this too is like critical thinking doesn't have to happen right away. Maybe it starts right away. So when you're having that conversation with someone that feels a little unsafe, but it is something that you want to learn more about, maybe come back to that person later, that's all possible too, right? That you take that moment to say, file that away. This is something that I wanted to speak to, but I'm not going to speak to it right now because the situation is hot, right? Or this is unsafe. So teaching kids to do that too, right? Make a note of it, write it down. Let's talk about it later. You don't always have to in that moment to be able to change something. That like critical thinking isn't always immediate. In fact, I would argue oftentimes it's not immediate because it's about slowing down and asking questions and trying to understand. And you don't do that so fast. Yeah.
You know, it's so incredible that you bring us to this part. You know, I often, well, just an hour ago, I was talking with Luis. You know, we were going back to 1994, being people of color in Salem. You know, and we were just commenting that, you know, that the fact that we will see a police officer's car coming towards us, and we are going, and immediately we went automatically to our rear view mirror to see him making the U to stop us. And I was telling him that for me, it happened to me like 2-3 times a week, you know, and he said the same thing to me. And so I started asking black people and Latinos, have you been stopped? And, oh yeah, all the time. And I started doing that, and then, you know, 4 black men, including me, we started doing a little exercise of talking to people of color and saying, we got this number, if you get stopped, would you just ask the police officer for his badge number? That's it. But you know that's dangerous, you know? So I compare that, from that we developed the Salem Cancer Coalition for Equality. You know, that's how long we've been, you know, we then created the Citizens Police Review Board and then the Chief of Police Community Advisory Board, you know, and because we said we gotta communicate. Even if we're so pissed, we know that if we return violence with violence, we are in the losing end. And it has, for people of us have been like that for hundreds of years. There's no win. But for me to see in 2018 and see a presentation of black parents, of middle class and wealthy black parents, talking about what would be the first thing that they tell their teenage kid when he finally passed the driver test. What's the first thing that those parents tell their kids when they're driving?
You saw a presentation on this?
Put your hands always, if a police officer stops you,
Oh,
put
yeah.
your hands on the board immediately.
Do not.
Even if you're
do
driving a Bentley
anything.
or you're driving a Rolls Royce, it
Never-
doesn't matter.
Never.
Put your hands,
Put your hands up.
because
It's
it
so
might
hard.
end up killing you.
It's hard.
And you might think, well, that sounds a little strange. Is it really? Is it really? When we as Latinos will tell our teenage kids, wouldn't those be the first things que nosotros le decimos a nuestros niños? Por ejemplo, cuando ya cogieron la licencia para manejar o ya la van a coger. Cuando lo pare un policía, mi hijo, lo primero que hace es ponga las manos arriba y haga exactamente lo que le diga al policía, no vaya a moverse de repente, no vaya a hacer ningún movimiento raro, tenga cuidado, sea cordial, responda a todas las preguntas, no argumente, no se argumenta, ¿no? Con el policía.
And I'd like to say that you, in that moment, you were probably very much thinking critically. But it doesn't mean that you need to be unsafe or embark on the conversation there. Like that thinking critically doesn't always have to be an outward
Correct.
piece. And one of the things I love that you brought up is the importance of sharing stories. Right? We talked about the single story. So how do we get more stories?
Correct.
We talk to each other about what's happening to us. We talk to each other about things we're concerned about. Right? We talk to other parents. We talk to our kids. We have our kids talk to each other. So that we can share stories, so that we can do things like, and we talked about, I put this kind of funny thing together, which is a recipe for critical thinking. And I put the ingredients and then the preparation. And it's a little busy behind me, but I will talk you through it. So the ingredients, what I think of as what you need to be able to think critically, you need curiosity. And it doesn't always come naturally, but hopefully you push yourself to be curious, to ask those questions. And a second ingredient is to ask tough questions, right? Just like Eduardo was talking about, right? Who is this for? Why is it happening this way? Is it possible that it's not all of the police officers, but maybe just a few of them? What can we do about it? These are tough questions that could feel dangerous. They could feel unsafe to ask them. So you find a space in which to ask them safely. You take your time. You ask other people what they think, and you use those, right? Another ingredient that it takes is time. And I think that this is one of the main things that keeps people from thinking critically, is actually having to take the time to learn about an issue, to ask other people, to gather information. We have Google, and that's helpful, but to really understand an issue, that's going to get you a certain part of the way, and you have to go the rest of the way, and that oftentimes means using different kinds of resources. Resources for critical thinking include the internet, but not limited to. The library is an obvious one. Other individuals in your community, other individuals outside of your community, leaders, right? Written materials, the media, all kinds of things at your disposal to help you think critically about an issue. Boldness is something that I was thinking a lot about, right? That worry that you may have that thinking critically, outwardly, talking to someone might shut them down, might scare them, might make you unsafe. You have to be bold to think critically. We, I think, as you mentioned, are in a moment in which it's not welcome to think critically. Right? We're not having a civil dialogue. We're shutting down. We're saying we don't talk about that anymore. When it's time to sit down to dinner, it's better not to talk about politics. Right? So that's what we're being told, and that's what we're telling each other, is to not talk. But we have to be bold in this moment to critically think and to say, no, actually, nothing is going to change if we don't think critically. Nothing is going to change if we don't talk openly about issues that are hard to talk about. An open mind is also an essential ingredient to thinking critically. And it's one thing to ask hard questions, but if you're not willing to hear what people say, then you're not going to be able to understand, right? You're saying, I want to ask you, I know that I'm supposed to ask you about this, but what you say, I don't like it, and I shut off. Okay, so it doesn't really get you anywhere.
One place where I think critical thinking has failed tremendously, especially young people who've gone to college or out of high school and are looking for work, is like on hiring committees. I always feel there's someone trying to rush consensus. Always. You know, and it could be HR, it could be a supervisor, but it's like, well then, this whole panel is just show. It's a show. It's a show truck, right? You know who you want. Let's cut the shit. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
But no, I get really mad because I've been on these panels. And so if you insert a thought about a candidate that's not in the like, this is who we want pile, then people get like, I want to get the interviews next week. And now you're throwing a wrench.
A wrench. Correct.
You know? And it's like for the person who didn't have a great GPA, or the person who has only been in the job for a year instead of 3, right? Or for the person like me who got a GED, right? It's hard to advocate for those people because people are afraid to upset the HR or the supervisor's timeline. So you also have to be safe in the work environment, and people don't want to be seen as that person, and so they just let the process flow. And so I think, just like we talk about police officers and not challenging in that moment, I think people are really afraid of challenging a supervisor or an HR person. But then you have candidates. That's how you have a planning commission in every city in Oregon who's mostly all white, right? And then these are the people who are, and I know we have the bridge on the third bridge as an activity here. Hopefully we'll get to it. But then that's how you get these displacement, right? And so I think just not just in dealing with police, but I think it's also in situations of people wanting to rush consensus. That's the main point I was trying to make. People want to pre-bake consensus and then put it in the oven for 5 minutes. We're done.
We see
Well,
that with
that's-
juries too, right? Right, we see
Yeah.
that, we are constantly hearing about jury members being forced. There's one person who saw,
Thank you,
maybe it was the one person of color on the
We
jury
need
who
to
said,
get out.
this is not right. This is not right, and I need to speak up. And sometimes they're thrown out for that. Right, so it's a really another example of how, yeah, we're trying to rush to consensus, and I call that structural racism, right? That
Yes.
speed that the HR team is taking and making to be able to make decisions quickly, that in effect is an act of racism, right? It's an act of violence and oppression, and that's something that's sort of like, how do you begin to have that conversation with the HR, right? Well, I think you do if you are that person who makes it to the managerial class, right? You do if you have someone that you trust there. When it's your turn to make a decision, and feel safe, you are the one who is bold and says, I'm not comfortable with this process, right? I think it's being rushed. I don't think it's fair, and I think we need to rethink this. And that's not easy.
And then you have to question that, right? So for, like, if we're part of the hiring committees, and this has happened over and over again, the exact same situation that you just mentioned, where they already have a person that they want, and they're just following protocol just because of it, but they already know who they're gonna hire. And then, like, I've found myself questioning the process. Well, then why did we have the interviews? Why did we have a panel of interviews? What was it about this person that we're not looking at? They scored a high score. Well, they didn't interview so well in this section. Why? Why are we taking a look at it that way? But it's challenging to question those types of scenarios and situations, because then oftentimes you get pulled out of the next process.
Label.
Right, but it does go back to institutional racism and our systems of oppression that specifically keep people of color out of certain positions and agencies
And decision-making bodies.
and decision making.
That's the most
Yeah.
important one.
And so what we can do is be watchful, right? Like, in my capacity as a white person with a PhD, I've definitely been the person at the table to say, we're not doing that. We're not doing that. We're not making a decision in that way. It's unfair. It's not okay. So it's an example of using my privilege in a given situation, in which I don't always have that ability, right? There are moments when I feel unsafe and it's not gonna be okay for me to do that, but I'm ready, right? It's that what we talk about with fighting racism in general, is being ready for that moment when you can use a form of privilege that you do hold, because we all have some, right? Or when there's something that's sexist that's happening, then you can use your privilege as a man to get in the way. And I think of that with critical thinking too, right? You are always thinking critically, hopefully, but you're ready for that moment in which you can act using that, right? When you can make a convincing argument for why this is unfair and it shouldn't happen, and why, they should be ashamed of themselves, and it's time to make change. So you're sort of waiting for that, and it's frustrating to wait. But if you're ready, and if you have your critical thinking tools finely honed, then you'll be able, when the moment is right, to take a stand, right? You'll be that juror who says, go ahead and throw me out, I will not go quietly. This is not okay, right? You're ready for that, because you've practiced. So just a few more things. We are running low on time. Preparation, right? We talked about beginning by asking questions about the issue, whatever that issue is. What do you already know about it? What do you need to know? Kind of a brainstorm of a sort about an issue, right? And we hopefully will come, at least for a few minutes, to talk about the idea of building a third bridge in Salem across the Willamette, right? So you hear about the issue, and there's fierce
third
debate.
bridge issue.
And there's fierce debate. And maybe you've sort of heard about it in the background, but haven't really engaged it. So what do you do right away? You start asking questions about the issue. What do you already know about it? What do you need to know? You gather information and stories, right? You try to be open to them. You hear what other people have to say, even if you assume you're not gonna like what they have to say because of how they look or how they voted in the past or how they're coming at you with it, but you listen, right? And ask questions to try to understand where they're coming from. You think, what would this look like if you were on the other side, right? Who else might be impacted by this? You listen and you try to hear what others have to say to you, right? Because that's, again, the only way that we learn and grow. You share what you've learned and you practice talking to other people about what you've learned, right? In ways that are non-confrontational, right? When the situation is right. You tell them what you've learned, and by telling them, and I always have students do this, right? Tell me what you learned, so that I know you actually learned it, right? Show me what you know, right? That kind of thing. So practicing it over and over again is how you get strong and how you make an informed argument that people will listen to. You accept and expect complexity, right? I only know this much about this bridge issue, and I already know it's complex, right? And that's okay, and I expect it. I don't expect it to be simple. And I accept that it's complex. And so what I have to do is to do all these other steps, because I know that it's going to be complex. I know it's going to be hard to wrap my head around, but I'm going to try anyway. Right, so there's my recipe for critical thinking.
Like that.
So thank you for that. Thank you for taking on and doing a little bit of practice. You immediately, I think, saw
Thank you for bringing.
how many questions there are to ask, right? How many experiences you have to share even amongst each other. You saw what it's like to be somebody who doesn't live here, asking about and hearing about the different issues. Somebody who's lived right in the area that will be affected, right? Those are the things that we want when we're thinking critically. So thank you all for participating. I'll give you my contact so that you can get in touch if you want to follow up on anything. And I know that there's more of these electives to
Yes.
come, so I'll let you take over there.
Oh, more classes.
So like always, this is long coming for many of us who have been doing this, trying to engage our community in this type of critical thinking conversations that have to do with the well-being of our community, of our children, our families. So for us, having the professor here is really an honor, because she wanna engage us in that exercise that has to do with being solid thinkers, thinking and presented solid arguments. And she's giving us the steps on how you have to work it. So I want to get us to give a round of applause to the professor for taking this time all the way from Portland to come and share with us. Thank you so much. We really appreciate you.
Thank you.
And I wanna say that what we're trying to do is precisely is having these conversations to eventually get people to get fired up and start thinking about running for office, committees, representation. You know, we know that these conversations about not being like sounding like we are not in the room when we are there in these communities of Salem or Woodburn or, you know, all around the Willamette Valley. We have this next October 11th. It's a Thursday also. And this is will be right here in this same building and this same room. And we will have, again, some homemade delicious food. And the subject to digest that night will be voting and beyond. What it takes, you know?
Voting and beyond.
Voting and beyond. You know, so if you would like to come back and join us on this exercise of what it takes and what it means, please feel open to sign here, and just put your email if you may, you know, and you could start that, Adriana, we really appreciate that. Thank you.